Okay, so we'll get started. You'll hear a lot better if you put on the headphones, which you can get over at the desk there. So today we have a really interesting, I hope, presentations on energy storage. So looking at all different types of storage technologies and applications. I'm your chairperson for today. I'm working for EASE, the European Association for Storage of Energy. I'll start with a very quick introduction of EASE and what we're doing, and then an overview of the storage market and how it's developing in Europe today. And then we'll head into the presentations. We'll do presentations and leave time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can ask them at the end of each presentation. But we'll also do a panel discussion at the end. So if you have any questions that you would like to hear inputs from the different speakers on, you could save those for the end. So I hope it'll be interesting for you. And please feel free to jump in with any type of questions that you have. We're happy to discuss any aspect related to the different storage technologies. So as I said, I'm working for EASE, which is a member-led association representing the storage industry in Brussels. Sorry, I'm not really sure why the text is funny on that screen, but I hope you can see it fine. So our mission is to represent the energy storage industry in Europe towards European policymakers, try to make sure that the benefits of storage and the different storage applications are well known and appreciated, to make sure that we have an energy market design and policy and regulation that helps the storage market to thrive, and also serve as a platform for information sharing within the storage industry, and also the storage industry sharing with policymakers and external stakeholders. So it's a rapidly growing industry. Things are changing very quickly. And so there's still a need to gather information and share with policymakers. What does this mean for European policy? And what will the impact of storage be for the energy sector more broadly? We have about 40 members across the energy sector working on all different types of storage technologies. So from research centers to technology suppliers, developers, utilities, distribution system operators, transmission system operators. We try to bring the whole storage industry together and really focus on the value that different types of storage can have for the system, and make sure that we have a policy and regulatory framework that really rewards the services that storage can provide, and policy that's technology neutral. So I'm sure many of you have heard about some of the storage technologies. Lithium-ion batteries, for example, are a very hot market for the time being. Some of you may not know that pumped hydro storage is still about 95% of installed storage capacity in Europe. So it's really a really big topic and a really important provider of flexibility. But there's a whole range of different storage technologies available. We in EASE, we divided them into 5 different families. And it's just to show the diversity of the storage sector. There are technologies that provide very fast response and more short duration services, and technologies that can provide up to seasonal storage, like heat storage or power to gas. So there's really a whole range of different technologies available. And what we're seeing now is also more hybrid storage systems, so coupling different storage technologies together into one system. So today we'll be having presentations on a couple of the different technologies and also on different topics that affect all storage technologies. So it's a pretty diverse and wide-ranging discussion. The storage market, as you probably all know, is growing very quickly. This slide shows the electrical energy storage capacity, so the annual installments from 2015 until 2019, and you can see that we predict about a 6-fold growth in the amount of storage capacity that's annually installed. This covers battery storage and the different electrical storage technologies, but not pumped hydro storage. So you can see it's changing very, very, very quickly. The biggest segment right now is one of my slides is missing. The biggest segment right now is front of the meter, so more grid-scale storage applications. So a lot of storage projects now are providing balancing and ancillary services, frequency containment reserve, primary reserve, secondary reserve, and so on. We're also seeing a lot of new ancillary services where storage is very competitive. Commercial and industrial is the smallest segment in Europe, but it's something that's seeing a lot of increasing interest. And the residential sector. In certain markets, this is really attractive. For example, Germany has a very well-known, booming residential storage sector, but also, for example, Italy is becoming a hot market. So different technologies are used for different types of applications. So we still have quite, let's say, a fragmented market across Europe. And what you can see today is that the regulatory framework of each member state is still quite different. And that determines how profitable and how attractive storage is. So one of the things we're trying to work on in East is to have a harmonized framework for Europe. And what we'll go into today is some of the different storage technologies and applications and the different barriers. So there's a lot of change in the storage sector. There's a lot of new technologies, new applications, new approaches being tested. There's a lot of questions also. A lot of them are about the storage business case and the profitability. There's a big discussion among policymakers about ownership of storage by regulated entities, so we'll go into that probably in the panel discussion. There's a lot of question marks about how the different storage applications and services can be defined, tendered, and monetized, particularly at the distribution level. So how can we have storage as an alternative to grid infrastructure if it's not owned and operated by DSOs and TSOs? A really big question is how to stack different storage services, so how to improve the business case by making the storage used for lots of different services and applications. Obviously, there's lots of questions about storage technologies. Is it right to pick winners and losers? Should policymakers do that? Are we going to have one technology winning out at the end of the day and really taking over the storage sector, or we continue to see a diversity of different technologies? Also, a big question is how do we make sure that regulation and policy, but also the energy sector more broadly, keeps up with the transformations that are happening in the storage sector? And we'll also go into some questions around consumers and blockchain and what digitization means for the storage sector. So that's kind of a general overview. I'm going to go to the first speaker in a minute. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll go to the first speaker. So our first speaker is Sam Wilkinson. He'll be presenting a little bit more about the storage markets and applications. So if you're ready.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. So a question that we get asked all the time as market analysts is, how big will a market be? How big will the energy storage market be? And one of the first things that I like to do whenever I'm creating a presentation is to look for some images to include, because otherwise you just look at a lot of graphs, which is ultimately pretty boring. And this one just jumped out at me as being brilliant. This is a child that desperately wants to be bigger than he is today. And the more I thought about it, the more this was like energy storage. You've got something which is very young and very exciting and really requires a huge amount of investment in terms of time and money to really help it to realize its full potential, to help it to grow. And I just thought that was actually remarkably similar to the energy storage industry today, which is on this path to growth and has so much to achieve and yet requires so much time to get there. But to directly answer the question as best I can, IHS Markit believes that by 2025 we'll be looking at over 50 gigawatts and over 140 gigawatt hours of batteries connected to the grid around the world. And I should be clear that we are talking specifically about battery energy storage in this presentation. That will generate annual revenues in terms of hardware sold of nearly $8 billion. And there will be 9 countries worldwide, compared to 0 today, with a gigawatt of battery energy storage connected to the grid. Now, before I go any further, I just want to say a couple of things about who I am and the company that I work for. So my name's Sam Wilkinson, and I'm responsible for market intelligence for the energy storage industry at IHS Markit. IHS Markit is one of the biggest providers of data, insight and forecasts on many, many different industries. But my team specifically focuses on solar, energy storage and energy technology. And we use a very wide range of experience, analytics and data to help companies with their strategic decisions, whether that's investors or manufacturers or suppliers around the world. I'm going to start off just sharing a few ideas about why it is that energy storage is such a hot topic. And actually, when you try and think about it, it's very difficult to summarize in a small number of different factors. There's actually many, many different things happening all around the world that are combining with energy storage at the very center of it to make this such an important topic about the future of our energy system. But to summarize, these are the four most important things that I can think of. You have the falling cost and the increasing contribution of renewables. Renewables are now, or more renewables are installed than conventional thermal power generation every year now. And that will almost certainly remain the same for as long as we can see out into the future. We have just the increasing amount of batteries that are around us today, the improvements in technologies and the incredible reductions in cost that we've seen for batteries. We see a very real interest in becoming more independent from the centralized energy system. Totally separate from the economics of it, people like the idea of being either disconnected from the grid or somehow more independent in terms of the energy they produce and they consume. And then finally, just the rising cost and the increasing policy that is driving us away from that sort of traditional, conventional thermal power generation. And these are the four sort of main things that are contributing to making energy storage such a hot topic today. Now, to directly answer the question that I was given to answer today, like what are the hot markets for energy storage? This shows annual battery energy storage installations in 2018, 2019, and 2020, broken into the major markets. Now, we track around about 20 different countries today, but the biggest ones over the next 5 years will certainly be the USA, which has an increasing range of different policies to drive the market there. South Korea, which has very, very strong government support for battery energy storage. In China, where they're continuously wrestling with a huge amount of renewables that they have on their grid. Very, very big challenges there to integrate that. And then you have Japan, similarly, using battery energy storage to overcome intermittency challenges on the islands. And then in the UK, where we've seen a huge build out over the last few years, thanks to regulation around frequency control. And sort of alluded to it a little bit there, but one of the important, one of the interesting things is that every single market is somehow a little bit different, and you have very different market segments in each country. So this shows cumulative installations from 2012 to 2025 for front of the meter, so large-scale storage in the transmission or in the distribution system, or paired with substations or paired with large-scale generators, versus behind the meter, which is a battery that's installed in a home or in a commercial industrial property. And on the left, you've got markets that are very much dominated by the sort of front of the meter segment, as we call it. And on the right, you've got all the countries that are dominated by behind the meter, those smaller distributed systems. And I think it's very interesting to see just how different these markets are. So now I want to move on and talk about what it is that's driving the market. And there is a big range of different things that are either pushing the market or pulling the market along. And just like the child sat there doing absolutely nothing, there are a lot of applications that are going to be important, but they're not necessarily what it is that is pushing the market forward today. And when we look back at some of the markets that were earliest to evolve, it's very clear that there is three key applications that are really driving battery energy storage. So in the residential sector, it's solar self-consumption, making sure that you consume as much of the power that you generate as possible. And then you have, in the C&I sector, typically peak shaving is the first application to drive the market. And then on the utility side of the meter, or the front of the meter, it's frequency regulation. But as policies have evolved, regulation has improved, costs have fallen, and understanding of the technology has grown, what we've seen is a much wider range of different applications that batteries can provide. And from other ancillary services such as capacity to backup is increasingly valued. But I think the most fascinating thing is that some of these are very much relevant only to the front of the meter. Some are only relevant to behind the meter, so the ones in green and the ones in blue. But what's really exciting is this kind of grey part in the middle, where these are applications that batteries either side of the meter can actually participate in these markets. So we see very quickly growing interest in aggregating behind the meter batteries in order to provide services to utilities and to grid operators that would typically have been done by large front-of-the-meter batteries in the past. And just to give a little bit more sort of colour and detail around that, we track around about 3.9 or nearly 4 gigawatts of operational battery energy storage projects today via the database that we provide to customers. And of those 3.9 gigawatts, over half of those projects are providing frequency regulation as a primary application. The other big application is renewable enhancement. So typically in the past, this has been around ramp rate control, where you are using a battery to ensure that the output of your plant doesn't increase or decrease too quickly. But that's more and more shifting to longer duration, sort of what we typically call time shifting or solar firming. And then there's other applications that currently present just a very small amount of that circle. But if we were to look into the future, I'm absolutely certain that those applications would make up an even bigger chunk, and we'd see a much more diverse range of applications being important. But to look at what that looks like by country, and this is looking a little further into the future, it's a forecast, not just looking into the past. This just compares the key applications in the USA, in the UK, and in Germany. Now, Germany is very much dominated by solar self-consumption and frequency regulation, or primary control as it's called in that market. The UK, very much dominated by frequency regulation again, thanks to the policies or the tenders that we've seen over the last few years. But the USA, probably the most mature of the storage markets today, there's actually a much more diverse range of different applications. You've got batteries providing frequency regulation and capacity. Behind the meter, they're doing things like time of use optimization, as well as solar self-consumption. So we see a much more diverse range of different applications, and that probably explains why the US is the biggest market today. Finally, we talked very briefly prior to my presentation about challenges, and I just wanted to share my view on this and on some particular roadblocks. As I think about it, there's several important roadblocks or hurdles for energy storage to overcome, or batteries to overcome. Regulation, which I'm sure will be talked about a lot today. Safety concerns. Now, safety is becoming a real issue. There's been certain events happen in certain markets where batteries have been misused, and the effects can be really quite frightening. So, that's becoming a real issue for the industry to address. Access to financing. The truth is, in energy storage, it's very unusual to have a long-term guarantee, like a PPA type contract, which bankers love to put money on. Government-backed 20-year payback, it's fantastic. Doesn't really exist for a battery in a frequency regulation market. Makes it very much more difficult to get access to that financing. And then prices. It is true, prices have fallen by an incredible amount in the last few years. That's not necessarily true anymore. And then certain concerns around constraints, supply constraints, both in the batteries themselves and also in the raw materials side of things as well. And I want to just quickly focus on the last two there to wrap up my presentation, if that's okay. So, in order to understand what is happening today in the industry, it's important to look at just what energy storage is to a battery manufacturer. Okay? So in the green line there, that's the consumer electronics industry. I guarantee that surrounded in this audience right now today, there is probably approaching a couple of hundred batteries in the form of phones, tablets, power banks, laptops. I'm fairly certain I've probably got 5 batteries between me and my bag on the floor just there. It's still a pretty small amount of the market. It's not really growing particularly quickly. You've got energy storage, which is growing pretty quickly, but it's still only a tiny little slither of the battery industry. And the thing that is absolutely 100% determining the supply and demand balance for batteries is the automotive industry. So we've got 143 gigawatt hours of growth just in the next 3 years for batteries into the automotive sector. That is what is determining what prices will do. And what we've seen over the last year or so is that actually demand or confidence in future demand in the automotive sector has increased very quickly. And that is very much taking the pressure off battery manufacturers to sell their product. It's very much shifted from being a buyer's market for the last 5 years, when prices fell by 70% in 5 years, to being a market where actually the battery suppliers are really calling the shots. And we've seen, particularly for the smaller manufacturers, the smaller purchasers in the residential sector, we've seen prices increase. If they can even get a battery, let's say this year, lead times are becoming very, very long. The biggest purchasers, the ones with large supply contracts, the biggest system integrators, they're still getting good pricing, but it's very, very much flat as opposed to 15 to 25% declines like we've seen for the last 5 years. Paired with that is some real concerns around the availability of lithium, the availability of cobalt. Prices of lithium carbonate have increased by 3 times in the last year. Prices of cobalt have increased over 3 times in the last year. And that's what the battery manufacturers are facing on the raw materials side as they wrestle with trying to bring down costs in all the industries that they serve. So I think that actually it's really interesting that we've met this sort of point in time where demand and supply is beginning to balance. Longer term, there is huge amounts of capacity being bought online, and we will almost certainly see prices continue to fall at that moderate levels, that maybe 5 to 10% compared to the 20 to 25 we've seen in the past. But it's an important thing to watch. And that pretty much uses up my time and concludes my presentation. There's a few sort of final thoughts there which I won't read out to you, but hopefully that's just set the scene for some interesting discussions today around what the market looks like, what the opportunity is, some of the challenges we need to overcome. If you have any questions at all, I believe we've got a few minutes for questions, is that right? Happy to take some now, or if you want to come and talk to me, I'll be around about for the next few hours and I'd be happy to chat with you. How do the questions work?
Sorry, thank you. It's working?
Yeah.
Can you go into a bit more of the regulatory challenges that you see? You touched on it as a roadblock, but you didn't go into more detail. So if you could give a few thoughts on that.
Okay. The question was around what are the regulatory hurdles. And it's difficult because every single country has different regulations, right? And they're very different and very progressive in some countries and very slow and very sort of hesitant in other countries. We've seen a lot of very positive regulation passed in the US over the last year or two, for example, allowing batteries to participate fairly. There's always in every market a talk around whether storage is treated as a generation asset or as a consumption asset, because it really is both or neither, like depending on how you look at it, and that can often mean that you're treated unfairly or taxed more than you perhaps should be. So there's a lot of discussion around that. I don't want to stand here and talk about every single country individually, but that's some of the things that I see. Regulation around safety is also very important. We've seen sort of growing, New York is a great example, Australia is a great example, where there's a lot of talk about how to regulate things to ensure that batteries are safe in public buildings, and should something like a fire occur, how that should be dealt with in terms of shutting the battery down or making it safe so that firefighters can go in and handle that. There's a huge amount that still has to be done there. Is there any other questions? Okay. I think this is
I was going to ask you about the financial barriers that you mentioned. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? What are the top barriers that you see?
Yeah, of course. The core challenge for energy storage around financing. You know, most people in the utility sector, when they're raising financing for a project, have been used to having a guaranteed contract for, you know, in solar's case, you had, or wind, you could sign a feed-in tariff backed by the government. You were guaranteed to get paid a certain amount per kilowatt hour for 20 years. You take that to the bank, they give you the money, you go and do your project. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it. The challenge with you know, energy storage, let's take Germany for example, and you're building a project that's going to participate in the frequency regulation market. You just don't have that luxury. You're going to participate in a market that requires you to bid in every week or every day or every year, depending, not every year, every day, every week. And you know, if you look at the prices and the way they've evolved, they've pretty much roughly halved over the last year or so in, you know, in what you're able to get. And that's just a factor of how many batteries there are in the system, how competitive that market's being. If you look at the PJM network in the US, it's the same thing. You know, batteries got in there. It was incredibly profitable in the first couple of years, but as more and more batteries got built, the market becomes saturated and prices get depressed. Investors look at that and seriously worry about your long-term ability to make a profit, and that it's just very difficult to convince them to back that. And that's the heart of it. I mean, we can go into in-depth discussions about how to overcome it and etc. And honestly, I'm not a financing expert, but that's the root of the problem.
Do you see regulations as a given or as something that can be changed or will be changed due to evolving business cases?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Oh, sorry. Regarding regulation, do you see a regulation as a given or is it something that could be changed or will be changed due to increasing or improving business cases?
I mean, all around the world we see regulation being changed to favour energy storage. You know, that's really down to associations like EASE and many other sort of bodies around the world that are really helping to drive that. You know, the energy system is changing very quickly. And energy regulation and policy always changes, but not very quickly. So I'm certain that we'll see things evolve to make sure that, you know, essentially the end goal is that we all have access to reliable, safe, inexpensive electricity. And I'm sure that the regulations will change. It's just they're going to get changed quickly in some countries and less quickly in others. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam, for this great introduction. So, after setting the stage a bit about the storage market and how it's growing, we're going to go into some of the technologies. So, Patrick Judge, who is Vice President for Business Development, New Solutions at Hydro-Quebec International, will be going into some of the research challenges of battery storage. So, please come up.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Yes. My name, as presented, my name is Patrick Judge. I'm from Hydro-Quebec, Canada, Quebec's province of Canada. I forget when I do these presentations that, you know, I'm away from Canada, so I need to just briefly give you a topography of our company. We are a large state-owned company. We generate 37 gigawatts of hydropower. We're roughly 99.9% green, 37 gigawatts of hydro and 4 gigawatts of wind that we integrate to our network. But we also have a large research facility. We've roughly 50 years of research in the field of generation, transmission, and distribution. And within that company, we have a center of excellence that does advanced battery material research in lithium-ion. So I'm here today to briefly talk to you about the research we do on that field and some of the projects we've done within our network to integrate those batteries and some of the challenges we have. We say in my presentation is best practices. I would like to say lessons learned because I'm not sure we did the best practices on the first project. So again, for us, energy storage, the best is yet to come. Again, we're hydro, so we do have storage. Luckier than smart, we have a geography that allows us to have a lot of generating hydro plants across Quebec, but we've done this research for lithium-ion, which we're quite proud of. So our objective at the Center of Excellence is to bring together manufacturers, research institutes, the government to accelerate the development of transportation, electrification, and energy storage through the creation of safe materials and their processes. Sam talked about safety in lithium-ion and storage. For us, it is a key factor in determining what type of chemistry we put on a network. We want to maintain our position as world leader. It might be surprising, but Hydro-Quebec, the Center of Excellence, licenses to over 40 companies its chemistries to different manufacturers, mostly Asian companies, to put these chemistries within batteries. We have active participations in battery component factories, and we want to do participations consider factories related to batteries with technologies developed by Hydro-Quebec. So roughly about the Center of Excellence, we're roughly 70 employees, 60 plus licenses issued. We have 50 years of R&D, 25 years specifically in lithium ion, 100 plus patent families, 80 million cost of assets, and roughly 110 million in royalty revenues from those licenses. At the bottom, we've put some history of what we've done in the past couple of years, but I'll go through that. What we do at the Research Institute, we do pretty much everything from the atom to the cell. We have everything is miniaturized. We have crushers to develop the materials. We make labs for electrodes, the cells, the modules, the packs, and pretty much everything at the micro level. Whatever we do at the IREC is kind of a micro manufacturing to see how it would be put into a large scale manufacturing of these cells. So it brings a lot of value when we sell these licenses to Asian companies to say, we've tested this and this is the kind of the way we make these cells. So that's pretty much the process that we've done. We do roughly cylindrical and pouch research developments. We have a variety of various applications. For the ones we've used at Hydro, which I'll come to later in my presentation, is LFP. We've talked about safety. For us, the LFP04 is what we will put on our grid, nothing else. Of course, it has its limitations in energy density, but it's unparalleled in safety. And we've worked with Sony, now Murata, to make these cells because they have a very good capacity in manufacturing high quality cells. These cells are a bit more expensive than the other Asian manufacturers of LFP, but for us, we focus on safety, not necessarily the lowest cost, because they're going to have impact on our grid. Again, let's not forget, Hydro-Quebec is state-owned. So that company, which generates a significant amount of revenue for the state, is also under very specific scrutiny to make sure the network is safe and reliable. So all these technologies can be put in portable watt hours. First years of the iPhones in North America, it had our chemistry within those phones. Again, in medical, power tools, and EVs, and so that's our focus. We have an international outreach. We do research partnerships, England, France, China, Korea, Singapore, and I forgot to put Japan there, but we obviously working with Murata is what we've done in past years. So we do partner with different research groups to make that technology evolve. So let's talk quickly about energy storage within Hydro, within our network. For us, it was a challenge to talk about storage batteries when we have so much hydro and no necessarily problems with different for peaks and whatnot. But the battery we developed has a lot of cycles. I put here 15,000 full discharge cycles. We're roughly at more than 20,000 on an LFP battery, full 100% DOD, real life, not simulated, that we use. Roughly 20 years calendar life. At the end of calendar life, 20 years, we're at 72.6% of still efficiency. Safe with lithium-ion chemistry available on the market. And obviously, our focus is on the grid, and I'll be talking about these two projects. So, the indoor storage, it's the racks is 37.8 kilowatt hours, and this is what we've put. The outdoor storage is a 10-foot container, and this one is going to the off-grid network. It's smaller, we give kind of a click and ship kind of system that you put on site and you easily put on. That's our newest generation. And yes, it comes in blue or red, so you can put the wrapping on there. We found that some customers really like to have a specific design on the container. For the researchers, might not be, it could be trivial, but it's impressive what customers, they wanted painted. So, surprise. So we want our strategy before going to market or partnering with companies to take this product to market is capitalizing on our own networks needs to develop our grid levels storage solution. Whatever we sell at Hydro, we use. So our storage, it offers a multitude of services based on our distribution network's needs, and storage must be as complementary to the distribution network's portfolio. The guys from distribution did not want storage on the network. They're used to building substations. They're not used to operating batteries. The first batteries to deploy was a challenge. It's not about not technology. The technology is there. It's about utilities accepting batteries on their network. The technicians are not used to that. So that was a big challenge. Within the family, within our company, we had a very large resistance in deploying that. By the way, Quebec does not have an electricity market, so it's just customers, CNIs that play a flat rate, no flexible rates, so there's no markets in Quebec. So it's just the energy is deployed and sold to customers for 8.9 cents a kilowatt, 24/7, 365 days a year, wherever you are in Quebec. So, and then also that's a limiting factor, by the way, for storage. You might want to add that to your presentation, Sam. So the first project we did was a 2.4 megawatt hour system on our distribution grid. It was for peak shaving. So that's a project we did with a WSP, which is an engineering company, to deploy, and that was just a substation needed upgrade, and we had an opportunity to just put a larger transfer. We've put this storage solution there, and it works well. It's been under operation since September of 2017, and we're looking to to put more storage on that network also. So it's safer, it's a safe solution, cheaper, and it can, well, I would say mobile. Doesn't look mobile, but you could take the containers, the racks out, and then deploy that to another solution if ever the load was to fall. So that was our first project, and trust me, the big challenge we had in there was not the cost, the acquisition cost of putting the battery in. It was just the documentation, the time we took to negotiate with the technicians to get that on the network. Just the paperwork, the work, the operations documents that we had to upgrade to give that to them took us 8 months more than we expected. The sign-off sheet was 10 pages, so that was a challenge for us. We have in Quebec 22 off-grid communities, and basically powered by, they're not connected to the network, they're generation diesel gen sets, and they roughly account for 60% our GHG emissions at Hydro-Quebec. So for 15,000 people, that generates roughly 60% of our GHG emissions. Because everything is powered by diesel gen sets. And this is, by the way, the province of Quebec. The rest of Canada is mostly to your left and a bit to the right. So our focus is by 2020, HQD, which Hydro-Quebec Distribution, will be going to the market for storage solutions. Our first project, when we sold that to the president of the division, we said, do not go to market, do not open for, ask for companies for Tesla, AES to deploy that on your network. You have no experience in operating a battery solution in those regions. And trust me, nobody ever takes off their jacket up north because it's below zero temperatures 365 days a year. So it's tough to get there. You can only get there a month and a half, a year by boat to transport that stuff. So we did this project internally to learn from that, how it would be operated, how it would work with the genset, and we started integrating solar in that. So that's one of our focus, and that's one of the regions. What you see there is a 300 kilowatt system. There'll be 3 more deployed there, and integrated just 20 kilowatt of PV just to start, and eventually is to put wind and more solar there, with the genset being a backup solution instead of being a primary source of power. So this is a small community. They do not heat electric, which is, for us in Quebec, roughly 70% of the population heats electric. 50% of our load in the winter is heating, but those areas just basically it's for lighting and appliances at the home. So just that community roughly has a peak of 200 kilowatt hours in the winter for these elements. So that's the project was deployed in September of this year. It's working well. Then the challenges of integrating that to the network and eventually integrating more solutions. We do everything in-house. The microgrid solution, the EMS software that's being deployed is everything in-house. Does that mean we'll be going to the market with that solution? Not necessarily, but Hydro-Quebec prides itself on knowing whatever it puts on its grid, and eventually we could go to market with partners for different solutions. So in conclusion, for us, the future is more than bright for storage. Like renewables have been for the last 30 years, storage is a true game changer in reshaping the energy sector. So greener times ahead. Thank you for your time. Any questions? Oh, yes.
Why do you do it? You are a utility, you don't have competitors, you are not losing your customers, so why do you develop energy storage? You don't have market push for it, I suppose.
No, we don't have market push for it. Why do we put storage on our grid? The question was, you have no competition, you have no market for it. Yeah, but I mean, times are changing. You got to go beyond your borders. You got to look at at Europe, what's happening here in U.S. What's going to happen in 10 years? We always say we're luckier than smart in Quebec because we have a lot of hydro, and I think that gives us an edge on the market. What's happening in U.S., in Germany, in other parts of Europe might happen to us in 10 years. Our rates are low, yes, but utilities, the way we're structured, has large cost. Operational cost is extremely difficult. Most of our fleet of employees are unionized, so they're fixed salaries, and basically our cost of operations will be going up. 5 years from now, 6 years from now, who knows if we're still going to be competitive about that. So we need to look at deploying on our network cheaper solutions that used to be just simple traditional solutions. So basically it's increasing within Hydro-Quebec, it's increased the portfolio of services we can offer to consumers. For example, batteries, for C&I customers or farmers, that are very few at the end of the line that need increased consumption. We put a $12 million, $15 million solution, traditional for that when there was only 3. So basically that for us is to increase services that we have within our portfolio. And obviously we have researchers research and they find stuff. That what they found is quite interesting for us. But again, we'll be gaining that experience within hydro and ideally going to the market with that solution in the future. Other questions? Thank you for your time.
So we've covered a few topics now relating to battery storage. We're going to go to a slightly different topic, the gas grid and how it can provide flexibility to the system. So our next speaker is Nicolas Peunier. He's a senior strategic analyst at GRT Gas, and he will be going into power to gas and different challenges and opportunities there. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, maybe you would ask why a guy from the gas first and from the grid would appear here, and I will try to explain you how far and in which aspect gas is and gas grid is a support to the storage operation. Maybe a first short presentation of who is GRT Gas. If you want. No, but. So GRT Gas is a transmission operator in France, in the biggest part of France. We operate high pressure pipeline. We operate a gas high pressure pipeline in France and in part of Germany. We support 140 shippers with 750 industrial customers. And gas is used in particular for heating, which means it has a high swing. That's why we have colleagues who are operating gas storages, and that's the first link to storage. One thing about the energy transition, you have variability everywhere, apart where you spend big money. That's the history of 2 years of sun exposure in the north of France, where I stem from, and the wind. You see the summer-winter peak for sun, and then you see also variability in the production. So if you have solar or wind turbines, you are producing irregularly. On the other side, the demand is also irregular, and of course, there is no match between the two, which means there is a need for storage to ensure an optimal use of your fixed assets, are they production or transmission in the meantime. So that's one thing, and the bad news is it's not getting better. Here is the European mix for energy, and what we are getting rid of is coal, oil, which are the easiest storable energy vectors at the moment. So we are going towards electricity, heat, which are the final usage, and which are relatively hard to store. For heating, for example, you can store it, but not, or it's very hard to store for a long period. The colleagues here in Vienna, they have a storage for their district heating. It's 850, I think, just let me check. 850 megawatt hour storage. It's more or less 7 hours of their peak production. So it works well for regulation on short term. For long term, it's a tricky issue. For electricity, we just saw it's also not easy, in particular for big quantities and long duration. That's the difficulty, and it will increase because an oil tank is relatively simple to build and concentrates a lot of energy in a small amount of volume. So the storage issue is already existing, and that's why, of course, it's emerging. I mean, with the variability, it will get more and more stringent. We'll have to address it. And the question that we as system operator are trying to address is how to address it. Where is the best place? At the beginning, you heard of this behind the meter, in front of the meter. And just to make an analogy, which in my view is just a good way to address the issue, you can try to confront it with your IT storage. What do you address with the storage? If I want to share a photo, my vacation photo with you, what happens? I send it to you. If you have a local storage, we store it on two places. So the issue is, do we create too much storage? I would look at the photo on Monday, you would look on Tuesday, but still we'll have it on two places. So the amount of storage depends, is different if you have a local storage or if you have a pooled storage. If you have a pooled storage, you put the photo and you access it differently. Other issue is scalability. If I want 1.7 teraoctet of storage, I have to buy 2 times the 1 teraoctet storage. So the chunk is probably different if you have a local storage or a pooled storage. Disaster management. If my disk crashes, I want to have a spare disk. So I have two disks instead of one. If it's pooled, the disaster recovery system is also limited. And accessibility. If something is on my hard drive, on my computer at home, I cannot access it somewhere else. So that's probably the issues which could be a sort of questions we can address between local storage and pooled storage. The only thing is, for whoever took the plane before Wi-Fi was in the plane, you have to have a network. You probably all have computers. Your IT people probably reduce the storage on your computer. And the first time you go into a plane without Wi-Fi, you realize sometimes it's good to have things on your side. So that's an issue and that's where our network, so be it electrical network or gas network, come into play if we have a reliable network able to transfer data or energy in that case relatively quickly across distances, then the approach to storage will be fully different. And that's also the case when we are speaking of people getting off-grid. Frequently, or at least what I've seen in the US, people speak of off-grid after each hurricane because the network takes time to put back in place. So it's a challenge for the network operators to deliver a good service. Otherwise, well, the priority will be given to local storage and getting off grid towards being on the grid. So now, these are general discussion. What does gas do in this story? Well, we believe that gas is an enabler for the energy transition. First, you store a molecule. It's good vehicles for storing energy massively and efficiently. If you look at the storage capacity in gas in Europe, at the moment it's 812 gigawatts. That's 800,000 Australian power packs. So really there's a one difference in scale between what gas world does in terms of storage and what electricity does. And each have their merits, but we just have to take care of adapting the good tool for the good use. And if you go to capacity which is stored, we just spoke of something like 141 gigawatt hour of batteries in the future. At the moment, in the European gas underground storage, there's 1,000 terawatt hour. So it's 8 million Australian power packs. So you see the order of magnitude is different, and it corresponds to the use of today of the gas, which is very much variable. So we developed an infrastructure of pipelines and gas underground storage, which are adapted to this answer. And that's where we have to take care that when we move the usages from oil and coal into other energies, it creates an increased demand for storage and for heavy amount of storages. The second thing is the gas grid. It's a way to interconnect demand and supply. In the same way that you would access your Google Drive or OneDrive, the gas grid will allow you to use the pooled storage of energy in the gas storage. Just an idea to keep in mind, there was a study by DNVGL showing that to transport 100 gigawatt over 100 gigawatt on 100 kilometers, you need 20 times more investment when you build an electric line than when you build a pipeline. When in Baumgarten, the Slovak border, there is a capacity of 65 gigawatt going through every day. I'm French, I speak in terms of nuclear plants. It's the equivalent of 50 nuclear plants production available for capacity. So it's a very strong infrastructure able to connect efficiently and at relatively cheap and discrete, because it's underground, the demand and supply, be it access to storage in that case, or just pooling the demand and supply, which also means when there's no wind in the north of France, there might be wind in Brittany, for example, and then you'd be happy to transform your electricity into gas and send it across, which allows a sort of pooling across the geographies. Last thing, gas. I mean, nobody uses gas just because it's gas. It's natively coupling across usages. You use gas to heat, that's the history. You use gas to produce power. Well, actually, at the beginning, you used gas to make light, but electricity is definitely a better tool to turn on the light than gas. So it couples also neatly with mobility, with compressed natural gas. And the last in the family is the power to gas, which means coupling back from electricity towards gas network. So as you can see, we have a nice solution. But then comes the question, yeah, Mr. Penier, it's nice, but after coal, after petroleum, well, your fossil gas is next in the row. It's a nice solution. Is it sustainable in terms of CO2 emission? And the good news for us and for everybody, I hope, is yes, it is possible. We've done a study. The French Energy Agency has made a study showing that we could produce renewable, 100% renewable gas mix in 2050. The resources are biomass for almost 70% and power to gas for 30%. So this coupling with electricity is one of the ways to decarbonize the hard to electrify usages of gas. Heating, high temperature, these are things where it's probably much easier to burn something than to produce by induction or whatever other means. And so the first thing is, yes, it's possible. Second thing, it's geographically, you have mapped the resources. It means also each region will have to build on their local resources, which is, by the way, more or less the motto in the energy transition, is adapt to your local resources, which makes it a sort of challenge for us gas operator to deliver our flexibility and transmission ability, because in some areas you would have more hydrogen, in some areas you would have more biomethane. And we have to build and to adapt our network to make it fully compatible with all types of gas and be able to maintain and operate these gas. So getting back to storage, when you have electricity in excess and you want to store, you might want to transform it into hydrogen. Hydrogen in some cases can be stored in underground storage, especially in salt cavern. In other underground storage, the question is still open. So you might want to go through a process called methanation. You recycle carbon and combine it with hydrogen, and then you use the classical gas storage. And if we have a system which is fully compatible and able to deliver to the market an easy way of access to this energy, we will be able to use the existing assets, in particular of gas storage, to support the energy transition in a sort of balanced mix. And I think that's a strong part that the gas can bring to the balanced energy mix. Looking at the time, I'm on time. So conclusions maybe, so biomethane and hydrogen are key enabler for a quick and step decarbonization of hard to electrify gas usages. Since this type of energy or vector or carrier has high versatility, it can serve sector coupling, so pooling the needs from variability from one sector to another, electricity, heat, mobility. You might not need everything at the same time. High volume, long duration storability, which is an inherent quality of a gas vector, and massive energy transportation of renewable from production fields and storages to consumer zone. Typically, colleagues in Germany, they have wind in the north, demand in the south, no electric line in the meantime. They are looking into power to gas to transport the energy from the windy north to the demanding south. Of course, we have to do some homework. We have to repurpose our gas grid to allow access to these existing flexible and assets, and also do it definitely and from the first time on the EU level to have a harmonized network, because today the gas network is by nature European-wide and is operating on a European level. We could not afford a time for a battle of standard where one will say A, another one will say B, and at the end we spend 20 years, will be too late for 2050. that's what I tried to bring as a gas guy, a great guy, into this issue about energy storage, which is not only a question of electricity storage. I hope you understood it. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Are there any questions on this?
Thank you for a nice presentation. You mentioned that you might, in some areas, have more hydrogen towards 2050. Would that influence the investment on backup capacity for the power system? I mean, combined cycle machines running on both hydrogen and methane, or I mean, a more wide spec gas. How would it influence the investment in assets to cope with this?
I think it's something which is open. We are at the moment working with our electricity transmission colleagues to find out what is the best for the system, and I think it's really the issue here to say we are changing the whole energy mix. We put it totally upside down, and we need to figure out what is the most affordable way of doing it. And I think a combination of the different types of storage, and that's what is explaining, is necessary, and each have their own merits. So if there is excess electricity for a certain time which you need to which cannot be used, probably one of the wise things to do is to transform it into a gas, be it hydrogen, be it methane, and store it somewhere. And then the question is, if you reuse it to produce electricity, or if you do not need it because you have sufficient installed capacity, it's an issue of system optimization. So it's part of our homework as system operators.
I think we all agree on that the gas system is one of the key figures for the energy future. But do you also invest in power-to-gas utilities? Because right now, as far as I know, electricity, hydrogen, methane, and electricity again is 20% in efficiency, more or less.
Yes, the going from electricity, transform it into hydrogen, transform it into gas, and back to electricity with engine or a tank is not very efficient, and that's where the system view comes. I believe that sometimes relatively inefficient things can be necessary to balance the system, although it might not be the systematic thing. Just an example, which also is, in my view, interesting. If you speak of biomass, you take a tree, you cut it, you transform it into pellets, you bring it to the biomass plant, you burn it to heat, and you have a district heating. I didn't make the calculation of all the energies which is present in the wood and delivered to the customer. We might have also relatively low efficiency. Still, going through a heating district heating is probably easier than bringing your tree to your flat. So it's a question of balance between efficiency and easiness. The fact of reusing assets which are existing is also a part of the equation.
Thank you. Thank you for this different perspective on storage. So before the coffee break, we have a presentation on a slightly different angle of storage. So looking at how we can use storage for active system, active grid management. So our next speaker is Eloy Gonzalez Ortega from Indra, and he'll be presenting some insights in digitization and active grid management. So.
Good morning, everyone. Like the presenter said, we are going to have today a presentation with a slightly different angle from everything that we have heard so far. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the control perspective. Okay, so how we can take distributed energy resources in general and storage in particular, and integrate it seamlessly in a very highly complex grid. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about where I work. I work for Indra. Indra is a global energy, it's a technology company. We are present worldwide. We have more than 40,000 employees, and in particular in the energy sector, we have more than 5,000 people working for the different aspects of the energy process, whether those are products in the generation side, distribution, transmission, all the way to the retail. Okay. We have teamed with Intel in order to bring about a new generation of technologies, okay, in order to monitor and control the highly complex grid. And I don't need to tell you about the capacities of Intel. In the case of Indra, we have quite a bit of experience in IoT. Previous OT, IT, and now IoT technologies, working in the utility industry for many, many years. And we have been one of the first companies that actively pursued the development of edge computing solutions, which is something key as to what I'm going to be talking to you today. Okay. So what are the challenges for an effective and scalable distributed energy resource integration? And again, storage being a high part of that, a very important part of that. Well, first of all, there is a risk of quality deterioration or loss of control on voltage profiles, okay, because of this high penetration of theirs, okay. There are difficulties in forecasting network flows, which hinder operation planning. There are losses in efficiency due to the increasing dynamic load imbalances that we are seeing in these new grids. Okay. We do have difficulties in fault location and service restoration. It's happening all around. There are definitely new cybersecurity threats. So all of that is forcing the operators to operate closer to the design limits. And there's a growing need to monitor and integrate all these new assets, these new distributed energy resources in general, storage in particular, and also some very active customers now into grid operation. So those are the challenges that we are facing. So customers are investing heavily in distributed energy resources these days, and this is creating new business models that are disrupting the traditional value chain. So we start from the left. We have a highly centralized model. We are progressively going through a distributed model, in which some people call transactive energy markets at the end of the road. So increasingly, we are going into this direction. In the end, the idea is to get this into this peer-to-peer market. So we are seeing a lot of energy efficiency programs right now, where we see consumption monitoring, metering kind of implementations, slowly going into self-consumption, and definitely energy storage is up there. Okay, and now we see, as the previous speakers have mentioned, how the future looks very bright for storage. But there are certainly certain hurdles that need to be overcome. Okay, there are many challenges that we need to face. Okay, and go through in order to have a very effective technology, the energy technology, incorporated seamlessly in day-to-day operations. Okay, so this is how we are seeing it. We are basically now, we're already gone through the energy efficiency programs. Now we are looking into self-consumption and energy storage. There definitely is a hurdle that needs to be overcome in order to continue going into this path, going towards the transactive, into these decentralized markets, decentralized models, okay, which is regulation. In order to have a very effective prosumer grid integration, okay, there are many challenges that we're facing right now when it comes to effective prosumer grid integration, and certainly regulation is a big aspect of that. Okay, in the end, the idea is to finally get into this peer-to-peer market, these totally distributed markets. Okay, so how do we see it? We see that this is, some people tend to look at this from very different perspectives, whether they are working in the grid or whether they are working in the retail market. And actually, this is something that goes in parallel and has to be talking to each other at all times. Okay. So again, we're going from this very highly centralized model to a distributed model. On the top part, you see, from the grid perspective, the type of things that need to be addressed. Okay, so monitoring is still a big challenge. Okay, because in the past we have a lot of monitoring capabilities through the use of SCADA technology, but basically all that was basically allowing us to see all the way to the primary substation, no further than that. And a lot of the distributed energy resources this day, and storage in particular, is happening on the lower voltages, where we have almost no visibility at this moment. So there is still things that need to be done when it comes to monitoring for especially the lower voltages, which basically will allow us to have a higher visibility, a better situational awareness for having an effective data integration in general, and storage in particular, which also will allow us to do an effective microgrid management. Once we go over the hurdle of regulation that I mentioned before, then we go into DSO grid services, okay? The DSO being able to provide those grid services that effectively will eventually take us to the transactive markets. And that goes at the same time that we have the path on the prosumer, on the retail side, okay? We're going through in a parallel way through those programs for energy efficiency, self-consumption, and local optimization that I mentioned before. Eventually going over the regulation hurdle, we will have the aggregation. And the aggregation combined with the perspective of the DSOs, okay, and the grid services provided by the DSOs is what eventually will take us into the future transactive markets. So, what do we do in Indra in order to be able to come into this? What kind of technologies are we using, okay, in order to have this effective their integration, okay? Well, first of all, these are the technological challenges that we have in front, okay? I mean, we're talking about, you know, a 1,000 increase, tenfold increase in the number of assets that need to be controlled. Again, once you go over the primary substation and into the lower voltages, more than 100,000 signals that have to be remotely managed and automated. And if you get into the behind the meter aspect, then you have to multiply that by millions, okay? So that's the challenge. And we need to actually take a look at, I mean, we have to control this. We have to monitor this in order to have a fully grid situational awareness and being able to effectively control this active grid. So we need to have something, technology that is intelligent, that is adaptive, that works really fast, okay? And in the end, what we're trying to do is enabling these new business models. And definitely something that the name of the game right now in the market is that we need to be interoperable. Standardization is the name of the game. We have to be very flexible in the games in these kind of technologies. We have to run away from proprietary vertical silos, okay, of technology. So the idea is you need to go more and more towards the concept of the open platforms, where open platforms being interoperable and following standards are going to basically allow you to support both grid and customer operations, both from the grid side and from the retail side, okay? And this is actually something that we're doing in Indra, being able to provide these kind of open platforms for providing solutions to retail customers and also to grid operators. This is the way that we see the architecture, a future architecture. We call their management active grid architecture in order to be able to monitor and control what is happening on those lower parts of the grid, lower voltages part of the grid, okay? So you have your sensors and devices on the left first, okay? Whether those are your traditional sensors like the RTUs in substations, but more and more, you're gonna get, you know, a number of new devices and sensors that are going to be deployed, definitely the ones that are going to control what's happening with your storage technology, right? And we have to handle all that tsunami of data that we didn't have before. Okay, so we have a huge challenge now as to how do we filter all that data? How do we control all that data in a closed loop environment with, you know, latencies of milliseconds? Because that's what the reaction times have to be. So we better start thinking about distributed intelligence. We better start thinking about having edge intelligent nodes that can take actions independently, that can control the batteries, that can control your distributed generation. Okay, again with very fast reactions, and we see a whole stuff going on right now on that layer. We definitely in Indra, we are investing heavily in that area as well, coming up with new technologies in order to be able to handle this distributed logic. Then there is the space of the real-time unified data space. And this is about, you know, being able to have all the information that is necessary, running away from vertical silos of information. That's no longer the name of the game, okay? We need to share all this data, okay, from all these different resources, from the generation aspect, from the consumption point of view, from, again, the storage also being a big part of that. And then once you have all that information into a single data space, then you can start putting in there the advanced analytics, the advanced control systems that you need in order to monitor what's happening and control it in an effective way. At the end, then you have your post-mortem kind of analysis using big data technology. So that's basically the architecture that we have been pursuing, okay, in order to be able to cope with these new requirements of the grid. So some of the showcases that we have as far as their management, first of all, I'd like to talk about an H2020 program that we conducted together with EDP in Portugal for distributed storage integration. This is in front of the meter, but a storage implementation in the lower voltages, okay, in the distribution grid. Around secondary substations, sometimes even in the low voltage feeders once you go through the secondary substations. So this is the drivers, and I'm not going to spend much time in here. The previous speakers talked to you, and they mentioned quite a bit about what a bright future there is right now for storage as a major source of grid flexibility. Okay. So in the case of Sensible, this particular showcase, we were conducting 3 different implementations. We had 3 different basically use cases. 2 of them were highly involved with storage, the one in Evora and then the one in Nottingham. The one in Evora was more about implementing storage in the medium voltage, okay, so in front of the meter, in order to basically meet the objectives that you see in there. So optimizing medium voltage and low voltage grid operations, being able to do low voltage grid islanding, microgrid energy balance, etc. And of course, flexibility in the retail market. In the case of Nottingham, it was more about integrating storage behind the meter, right? Capacities behind the meter, but at the same time, having the necessary integration with the grid operators in order to have situational awareness of what was happening. The objectives in that case were more about being able to achieve independent energy communities, being able to control, manage microgrids where there was a high penetration of solar, and all of that was achieved also by the implementation of storage technologies. Okay. This is a little bit of the way that we architected the different components and the ecosystem. And this is actually, if you look at it, basically, it goes very much hand in hand with the conceptual architecture that I described before. Okay, so you have here all your storage capacity that was deployed in the lower voltages of the grid. A central open field message bus, an OT bus, in order to integrate all the necessary information, whether that was information coming from storage, whether that was information coming from in this case, the DSO, from the point of view of the distributed generation that was present in that part of the grid. Okay, and this central bus, this central single repository of data, was the key enabler to be able to have this real time, and when I say real time, I'm talking about milliseconds, okay, in wide area networks, okay? So you needed that kind of visibility in order to have the situational awareness of what was happening and take very fast reactions, okay? And you see the different actors that were integrated from the perspective of the distributor, the DSO, and also the market operators and some independent actors, so stakeholders such as aggregators, etc. That was one of the showcases, some of the pilots that I wanted to mention. Another one that I would like to mention today is what we're doing in Australia, where we are basically working, cooperating with the University of Monash into demonstrating some of these advanced use cases. In this case, for managing a smart microgrid, basically the idea is to test some of the evolved functions that will have to be put in place for the effective implementation of transactive markets, the peer-to-peer energy markets. So I don't know if you're familiar with this. Rooftop solar right now is one of the major causes of transformation in the Australian grid. Okay, so the Australian energy model is changing dramatically, very quickly. And these high levels of distributed generation are already affecting majorly the quality indexes of the distribution grid. Okay, so you're getting things there like loss of control on voltage profiles, difficulties in detecting fault locations and therefore restoring service, losses in efficiency to the dynamic load imbalances, changes in power flows according to the time of the day, and in the end there are many difficulties in trying to forecast these network flows, okay, which is basically hindering network operations. So the goals that we had in the case of Monash is, well, first of all, evaluate all the different alternative business models, try to see whether whether a transactive energy market is feasible in the end. Automatic control of grid quality and stability by the implementation of these advanced architectures, okay? Maximizing the microgrid that they have to get the maximum value from the operation of the microgrid. And then what are the market incentives that need to be there for this local optimal energy management of the microgrid, okay? I would like to finish just with this high-level view of what the architecture is going to look like. And again, it's very similar to what I mentioned before from the conceptual point of view. You have all the devices, you have all the sensors here on the bottom, and the idea is that you need to have some technology components that are going to allow you to have all this maximum visibility on what's happening. To have at all times the situational awareness and real time being able to respond very quickly to these different conditions. Okay, and one of the important things that we are looking into in the case of the Monas initiative is the fact that you need to look at it from both perspectives, from the grid operations and from the retail operations. And those worlds, they have to be combined. Okay, they cannot operate independently. So thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions?
Are there any questions? All right. If not, thank you very much. Yeah, so we have a half-hour coffee break. So we will meet back up around 11:30. We have 2 more presentations on storage at the consumer premises, very interesting topic, and integrating distributed energy resources also at the distribution level. And after that we will have a panel discussion. So if you have any burning questions, any topics you would like us to discuss further, you can definitely bring them at the panel discussion after the coffee break. In the meantime, if you want to pick up some resources on energy storage, or if you have any questions or want to learn more, there's an ease booth just behind here, or you can go to the booth of some of the speakers as well. So please feel free to do that during the coffee break, and we'll see you back here at 11:30. Thank you.